So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you may be in the world. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Karen Rotmunsterman, and I am the Evaluator General of the African Development Bank. And on behalf of Independent Development Evaluation, I warmly welcome you to this 2023 gLocal session on the benefits of the Twende Mbele initiative on monitoring and evaluation practice in Africa. Let me first start with a few housekeeping rules. We have interpretation services, so please see the globe icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen to select the language of your preference. You can choose between English and French. The panelists will be speaking in both languages. Donc, nous avons de l'interprétation. Veuillez voir l'icône du globe au fond de votre écran Zoom pour sélectionner la langue de votre choix. This is a webinar format, so only the panelists can speak. So panelists, please all mute your microphones when you are not speaking to avoid any sound interference in the sound. Participants, to ask a question or make a comment, please type your question or comment in the Q&A box, which is also available in the Zoom toolbar. I will keep an eye on the Q&A box and I will read out your questions and comments when we come to the time for the Q&A, which will be in about 1 hour at 11 o'clock GMT. So this is our program for today. I will first make some introductory remarks. Then we will hear from the Twende Mbele program manager about the major benefits from the collaboration vis-à-vis the national M&E goals of the member countries. And then I will ask the representatives of 3 countries participating in the Twende Mbele initiative to share their experiences through a series of questions that I will put to them. And then we'll open up the floor for Q&A from the participants. So let me start with the introductory remarks. So since 2019, the gLocal Week has provided us, as members of the international evaluation community, with an opportunity to share experiences and to learn from each other. At IDEV, we always look forward to this week, as it fits very well in our core mandate of promoting accountability, learning, and building an evaluation culture on the African continent. This year's gLocal Week, which is held under the theme, The Future of Monitoring and Evaluation, Culture, Context and Collaboration, is well suited to stimulate our reflection on where we want to position the M&E ecosystem to adapt to the changing national and global environment. It is indeed beneficial that we examine our experiences on what we have done in the past that can help us move forward and what we can leave behind. In other words, these sessions give us the opportunity to learn, unlearn, and relearn from experience based on evidence of what works and what does not work. Within this ecosystem, we are cognizant of the fact that building effective national M&E systems are important, not only for ensuring that the right development interventions are implemented, but that there is national ownership and sustainability of the results of those interventions. This brings me to the reason for our discussion today. Building these national M&E systems calls for strong and sustained partnerships among the different players at the local, national, regional, and global levels. This session, positioned within the collaboration strand of the gLocal Week, is titled Moving Forward Together, the Benefits of the Twende Mbele Initiative on M&E Practice in Africa. The discussion will highlight experiences from this peer learning collaboration to build an M&E culture across the public sector in a bid to strengthen the implementation of national development priorities. We also hope to identify mechanisms that can improve such collaborations to advance continental and international development goals. The Twende Mbele initiative, which means moving forward together in Swahili, is a South-to-South peer learning platform among African governments, which was officially launched in 2017, although it existed for some years before that. It has been at the heart of promoting peer learning and collaboration in the area of M&E within the participating government interested in using monitoring and evaluation to strengthen government performance and accountability to citizens. The initiative involves 6 core country partners: Benin, Ghana, Kenya, Niger, South Africa, and Uganda, with 2 regional evaluation capacity development partners: the Center for Learning on Evaluation and Results for Anglophone Africa, and IDEV, my own department. In addition, 8 other countries actively form part of the wider learning network. Today, we are joined by representatives from Uganda, Ghana, Benin, and the Twende Mbele Secretariat to highlight how the initiative has impacted their national M&E systems, the benefits accrued, and in the future, what should happen even to have a greater impact to strengthen government performance. I therefore warmly welcome Timothy Lubanga, Andrew Asibe, Nadège Josu, and Ayabulela Dlakavu. Let me briefly introduce to you each of our panelists. And I will now ask the panelists to please turn their video on so that the participants can see them. So first of all, Timothy Lubanga is the Commissioner for Monitoring and Evaluation in the Directorate of Monitoring, Evaluation and Inspections in the Office of the Prime Minister of Uganda. He is an expert on monitoring and evaluation with extensive experience in social protection, especially in fragile and conflict-affected environments. His roles include chairing the National M&E Technical Working Group, initiating, developing, and managing the national M&E system, and developing national policies on M&E. Secondly, Andrew Asibe has approximately 40 years of experience in monitoring and evaluation practice, most of which have been spent supporting the development and institutionalization of M&E systems and building capacity in developing countries. He is currently serving as the Senior Technical Advisor in the M&E Secretariat of the Office of the President of Ghana. Some of the institutions Andrew has worked for include the International Development Research Center, the International Planned Parenthood Federation, and the World Bank. He has also participated in initiatives supporting African countries like South Africa and Senegal to build their national M&E systems, in addition, of course, to his own country, Ghana. Thirdly, Nadège Josu is an assistant professor at the University of Parakou in Benin. She has over 8 years' experience in evaluating development projects in sub-Saharan Africa. She was Benin's country coordinator of the Twende Mbele initiative from 2019 to 2022, and since July 2022, she is the Director of Public Policy Evaluation at the Ministry of Development and Government Action in Benin. And finally, Ayabulela Dlakavu is the Program Manager of Twende Mbele, based at the Center for Learning on Evaluation and Results for Anglophone Africa at the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg, South Africa. He is a researcher, academic, and analyst of public policy, and a monitoring and evaluation practitioner with extensive background in national development. He has experience in building national monitoring and evaluation systems across Anglophone Africa, such as in the Kingdom of Lesotho, Namibia, Botswana, Kenya, and Uganda. I will actually now hand the floor to Ayabulela to tell us more about the Twende Mbele initiative and the major benefits from the collaboration vis-à-vis the national M&E goals of the member countries. Thank you. Aya, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Session Chair E.G. Karen Roth-Munsterman, for your opening remarks as well as introducing the panelists. So I think some of my points you have already elaborated on them, but essentially I'll structure my very brief talk about the program in terms of its evolution, its relevance, in terms of where we are on the continent and globally, as well as shining a brief spotlight essentially on some of the benefits of the program that we've sort of unearthed through some of one evaluation we did, and also some of the feedback we get from participating countries. And then, of course, I'll move on to speak to the actions that are needed to scale up some of the benefits of the program. And of course, some of the more nitty-gritties will be elaborated upon by our country partners who are represented here. So let me go straight into it. So colleagues, thank you very much for joining. Good afternoon, good morning. So essentially, as the EG has said, Twende Mbele is essentially a multilateral peer learning program amongst 6 core African governments, Benin, South Africa, Uganda, Kenya, Ghana, and Niger, who have joined at different stages in the evolution of this program. It essentially, what the program seeks to achieve is the transition or a paradigm shift towards evidence-based policymaking, development planning, and implementation, so that our governments achieve their much-needed development outcomes, as expressed in various development frameworks. So the partnership itself is centered around mutual learning, and so that these countries can improve their country monitoring and evaluation systems for better development. By way of evolution, 3 countries were the original founders of the program, that is Benin, South Africa, and Uganda. The informal partnership between these 3 countries started around 2012, but more formalized in 2016. And then the program became funded by the then Department for International Development of the UK, which is probably now known as Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. And then around 2017 in September, the Hewlett Foundation saw value in this peer learning platform and decided to co-fund the program along with DFID. And this is when now the resources became available and the program started to essentially expand with the absorption of the Republic of Ghana in 2018. And of course, 2 further countries joined in 2020, which is the Republics of Ghana, Republic of Kenya, I mean to say, and the Republic of Niger. So those are the core 6 countries, colleagues, we have in this mutual peer learning platform. And of course, we've got 8 outlying countries who are part of the wider learning network. We've got Malawi, Tanzania, Cote d'Ivoire, Botswana, Ethiopia, Togo, Namibia, and Nigeria. And of course, our trusted ECD, Evaluation Capacity Development Partners in the region of Africa, we've got IDEV, who's our co-host today on this platform, IDEV at the African Development Bank. And then we've got Clear Anglophone Africa, who are also represented in some of our structures as a program. And of course, the program is essentially, the Secretariat is headquartered in Johannesburg, University of the Witwatersrand. And we've got a management committee to sort of govern and set the strategic direction of the program based on the expressed country needs, country M&E needs of these countries. And of course, we've got a technical committee that works with the Secretariat to sort of implement the adopted plan of the program. So that is by way of evolution and what we seek to achieve, colleagues. And just to move on to the relevance and effectiveness of the program thus far. So to date, Twende Mbele is essentially, as far as I know, the only government-led learning network of its type in Africa. And it's essentially achieving essentially SDG 17, which stands for partnerships to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. While the program itself is also a catalyst and an enabler for the entire Sustainable Development Goals, because when you build the individual institutional capacities that constitute partially a national monitoring and evaluation system conceptually, you essentially enable all the Sustainable Development Goals to have sort of like a bedrock or a foundation on which they can be achieved through the churning out of evidence across the other 16 Sustainable Development Goals, be it agriculture or poverty alleviation programs. And some of these Sustainable Development Goals, Twende Mbele has essentially partnered with some of the countries, be it an evaluation on a public health policy, or an evaluation of an agricultural program or policy, an evaluation of many other interventions that essentially transverse these Sustainable Development Goals. And of course, Twende Mbele has established itself as a go-to ally and a resource for governments and development partners who are essentially interested in this endeavor of tackling barriers to the demand as well as the supply of M&E evidence to achieve that much elusive goal of moving towards evidence-based governance, evidence-based practice. So essentially, it's a peer learning is at the core of some of the work that the program does, and some of the peer learning initiatives have seen the adaptation of certain M&E practices in one country adapted by other countries. For instance, Uganda and Benin have adapted South Africa's management performance assessment tool which was essentially a tool that measured various management practices of government departments with the goal, of course, of improving management practices. And that management performance assessment tool measured 4 key areas from strategic planning, looking at both planning and M&E, governance and accountability, looking at auditing, HR systems, human resources systems, because as we know, most endeavors fall flat in the absence of adequate human resources, and also financial management of departments. So that is one example of how peer learning has sort of been extrapolated across the program. And of course, in just 7 years, the program has also managed to train over 200 government officials in evidence-based policymaking. We've also done some work as a program in terms of evaluation capacity development of the other arm of the state, which is parliaments. M&E trainings for parliaments in Tanzania, Uganda, Rwanda, Ghana, Kenya, Benin, Malawi, Zambia, Niger, South Africa. As you see, colleagues, some of these parliaments fall outside the core member countries, but now transverse into our wider learning network. And of course, Twende Mbele continues to host numerous peer learning events for governments to convene, share challenges and best practices in the field and practice of monitoring and evaluation, as well as evidence-based policymaking, and to learn from each other. Essentially, that is the reason why we convene these peer learning platforms. Of course, Twende Mbele has also led essentially in that particular area of integrating CSOs into national monitoring and evaluation systems. And I'm sure Commissioner Lubanga will be speaking to, for instance, the health sector evaluation agenda that was developed a couple of years ago, working with the Ministry of Health, health sector CSOs, Office of the Prime Minister. These are some of the interventions we've tried to sort of co-partner with our country partners. Twende Mbele has also supported Pan-African efforts to develop an Africa-wide evaluation competency framework and essentially a collaborative curriculum working with African universities. And this is all to sort of bring about an Africa-centered M&E curriculum. So Twende Mbele is also working with other partners of a typical country M&E system. So while the core of our work is with governments, we certainly do not turn a blind eye on other partners or stakeholders in a country M&E system. So we've also worked with universities, we've worked with civil society organizations, we've worked with the other arm of the state, which is parliament, trying to make sure that legislation and oversight over government performance is informed by the best available evidence, and there's sufficient capacity essentially to demand such evidence. So that is the program in terms of its relevance. So just to speak to some of the benefits of the program, and in 2019, from 2018 to 2019, the Department for International Development decided to commission an evaluation to sort of track the implementation as well as some of the outcomes of the program. And there were 2 outcomes essentially that were subject for this particular evaluation. The first was an immediate outcome as expressed in the Twende Mbele theory of change. And I hope we can maybe share some of the links to the Twende Mbele website where you can find some of our key documents. So one of the subjects of evaluation was the immediate outcome of improved M&E systems established in partner countries and in the wider Twende Mbele learning network. So they were seeking to see Twende Mbele's impact in terms of the development of M&E practices, policies, tools, and procedures. And the second subject for that particular evaluation was our medium-term outcome, which is essentially bringing about effective M&E systems that are implemented and sustained in partner countries. And the methodology there is that essentially we had 2 country case studies of the 6, because as you know, colleagues, it's not always possible to evaluate cross-country partnership of this magnitude. So there were 2 country case studies that we went in depth in terms of this particular evaluation, and that was Ghana and Uganda, through key informant interviews and impact stories with NES stakeholders in both the countries. And then, of course, we had interviews with the Twende Mbele Management Committee to get a more representative sample. And the Twende Mbele Management Committee essentially is represented. Most of the countries all of the countries are represented there, including our 2 evaluation capacity development partners, Clear Anglophone Africa, as well as IDEV. So there were also interviews with those stakeholders. And then, of course, we also had online surveys distributed to many participants who usually attend Twende Mbele events to try and sort of triangulate and sort of expand the scope of that particular study so that we had rigorous enough samples to work with in terms of this particular evaluation. So some of the findings, I'll just go through briefly some of the findings of that particular evaluation. One of the findings was that Twende Mbele has indeed contributed to the development and adaptation of a number of M&E policies, plans, communication strategies for M&E and other M&E tools, which help to sort of build institutional M&E capacity. And some of my colleagues will speak more elaborately on some of these colleagues. Evaluations, that particular evaluation also found that effective M&E systems had been implemented in partner countries, demonstrated in the use of M&E information to inform public policies and programs, and the strengthening of a performance culture in our partner countries. There was also a finding on the improved integration of CSOs into national evaluation systems, going back to that example that I had given about the CSO work we did in Uganda. But of course, the CSO work has also been implemented in a number of our other countries, Ghana, and certainly Benin, which is also in the midst of doing a rapid evaluation in collaboration with some of the education sector CSOs. And Dr. Nadesh will be speaking more on that, so let me not go into her points. Another medium-term outcome noted by that particular evaluation was an increase in demand and use of M&E tools among core partner countries and wider Twende Learning Network countries, leading to improved governance. Of course, colleagues, with an evaluation, Twende Mbele will always probably err more towards the side of having contributed to some of these findings, not necessarily solely attributing some of these wonderful impacts or outcomes on ourselves solely. But certainly we have contributed. And of course, the M&E training was found to have led to improved attitudes towards M&E by parliamentarians in Ghana and Uganda, which were essentially our core country case studies for this particular evaluation. And in terms of recommendations that came from that particular evaluation in 2019, the first one was that Twende must reflect sustainability in terms of its financial resources and essentially move away from reliance on donors. In terms of what we have done, in terms of that recommendation, our fundraising efforts to sort of diversify our funding pool is an ongoing process. The second recommendation was the need to address expansion prospects every 3 years. Of course, that particular recommendation is dependent on the first one, availability essentially of financial resources to essentially discharge that particular mandate of expanding. The third recommendation was to find a way to increase political buy-in in partner countries. And that recommendation essentially was calling for a memorandum of agreement amongst the governments. Of course, that has certain implications, and that would put us in the realm probably of foreign affairs, and the various countries would essentially have various public administration processes to go through. So the management committee has discussed some of the complexities of that particular recommendation. And it's an ongoing issue we are grappling with. Well, not even an issue, but more like a matter we are grappling with. And the fourth key recommendation that came from that particular evaluation is the need to create a critical mass of country champions, because of course, public sectors are very dynamic and ever-changing. So sometimes you'll have certain M&E champions and then people move across to other entities. So there's that need to create a critical mass of country champions in terms of promoting and championing M&E work, and we've certainly made good progress in this regard. So in terms of actions needed to scale up the benefits of the Twende Mbele program, I think some of the recommendations we can make as a program is that, of course, in line with that evaluation finding, we need to diversify our funding sources, which will enable us to be able to action things such as expansion every 3 or so years. So that would depend on us mobilizing sufficient funding to enable us to sort of grow as a partnership, because Africa is home to 55 nation states. So for Twende Mbele to be truly representative of Africa, we'll probably need to grow a bit more, but that is dependent on funding, and we are essentially at work trying to make that a reality. And of course, within countries, Twende Mbele interventions and peer learning must cascade down to more sectors and subnational governments so that Twende Mbele has depth as well as reach in terms of its work. We need more partnerships with evaluation capacity development stakeholders, such as the African Parliamentarian Network on Development Evaluation, as well as other development partners, of course. We need to advocate for greater use of M&E evidence to lead to the domestication and implementation of global and regional development agendas, sustainable development goals, the African Union Agenda 2063, which is a key document for development on the continent, and as well as for advocating for an M&E practice essentially that promotes the acceleration of the implementation of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, the AfCFTA. So M&E practice that we champion as a program certainly needs to make inroads in those global as well as regional development agendas. And in queue with that, we also believe that we should forge evaluation advocacy partnerships with agencies implementing the AU development agenda. That would be the new Partnership for Africa's Development, NIPAD, the Africa Peer Review Mechanism, the APRM. And certainly that is more work for the Secretariat to do, because some of these, they are essentially based in South Africa as well, but we can always travel to other countries to forge these partnerships. And of course, in the age of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, we've got technology to certainly make those inroads in those partnerships. Evaluation advocacy partnerships are needed with UN agencies working on various SDGs. Of course, I think this is a common thread running through that Twende Mbele is not a program that exists in isolation with the rest of its evaluation capacity development stakeholders, because such partnerships can lead to greater footprint and reach for Twende Mbele, avoid duplication, thereby resulting in greater impact. So, of course, we need to advocate evaluation discourse and practice that is responsive to the Fourth Industrial Revolution, that is essentially advancing an M&E practice that highlights digital as well as technological state of African nations and how to improve that digital divide we find on the continent. So, I think Session Chair, let me stop there and then hand over to my colleagues to sort of flesh out the nitty-gritty in terms of in-country experiences. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Ayabulela, for that overview of Twende Mbele, a bit of the history, a bit of some of the collaborative activities that it has undertaken. You mentioned a number of tools that have been shared between the countries. They've been working on CSOs, also evaluation methods like rapid evaluations, developing competency frameworks, collaborative curriculum. I also recall there was work done on knowledge management, communication of evaluations, and many other topics of collaboration that have been the subject of discussions and work within the Twende Mbele initiative. Let me now turn to our country representatives, and I will invite them to share their experience with the Twende Mbele initiative. So I will ask all three country representatives to please turn on their video and to open their microphones. I will ask each of you some questions, but please also feel free to react to what others have said or to add on to what other colleagues have said. So let me start with Timothy, as one of the original member countries of Twende Mbele since the very beginning. Timothy, what do you see as the major benefits from the Twende Mbele collaboration vis-a-vis the goals of the Ugandan national M&E system?
Thanks, Karen, and greetings again to all the participants. Yeah, so I think the benefits and the value of Twende Mbele the values are various and have been highlighted in the presentation by Aya. But in our experience, these, in my view, are the strongest values and benefits we can reflect on. The first one is supporting the development of M&E systems, strategies, and tools. This is hugely of good value because at the time we were starting this initiative, many of the countries were at very, very different stages of having the necessary systems, tools, and even policies or structures. And through sharing and learning, we were able, for example, in Uganda to develop a very strong M&E strategy for the National Development Plan. And for me, that is a critical addition and value from participating in the Twende Mbele initiative. The other is, of course, also the tools that were developed jointly, which we have been using. For example, we have a tool that we use for conducting internal reviews. Every 2 to 3 years, we do a clear reflection of ourselves. Using that tool, we can, for example, understand, are we having more influence on the planning units of the different sectors across government? Are we creating the necessary demand for policy and program evaluations? Are we reaching out enough? Are people getting to know what we do, and so on? So we have the development of those tools and systems and policies. The second important lesson that I would want to share on this is around skills development, overall capacity enhancement in M&E. So through the Twende Mbele initiative, we have strengthened skills in M&E through a number of ways. Number one is just direct periodic sponsoring of our staff from the M&E department to undertake specific monitoring and evaluation training programs, be it at EPDET, be it at the winter school, and JPAL, and so on. And this has been of very, very good value in terms of preparing, especially new staff. When we receive new staff who have come from other fields and really don't have the experience and knowledge that is required to be a proper evaluation M&E officer. And then the other is, we have also had this specific targeted training on the generation and use of evidence in M&E, especially for SDGs. And these are training programs that we organize with the Twende Mbele whenever we have an international forum, such as AFREA, such as Uganda Evaluation Week, and others. And through these targeted training interventions, we have been able to enhance the skills, not just of our staff, but again of selected beneficiaries across the different departments of government. And then the last 2 points I want to highlight on schools development is the policy, the evidence-based program management training program that I mentioned. And this is a training program that targets senior policymakers, the heads of the government, the technical heads of government ministers and departments, as well as directors across government. What we discovered from this training is that it went a long way in terms of increasing the demand for M&E and preaching the message of the value of M&E in supporting planning and the work that goes on across sectors. And finally, specific evaluation methodologies which we have adopted, which I will share about a little later when we are discussing the lessons. So in summary, I think these are some of the key values that I think the Twende initiative adds to the enhancement of M&E systems and capacities in the respective country governments.
Okay, thank you very much, Timothy. Let me turn to Nadège. Comme le Bénin est aussi un des pays participants originaux dans l'initiative Twende Mbele. Donc, pour vous, quels ont été les principaux avantages de cette collaboration vis-à-vis les objectifs nationaux du Bénin?
Okay, merci beaucoup, Karine. Et bonjour à tous les participants de ce webinaire. Je vais commencer par dire que le Bénin s'est engagé depuis les années 2010 sur la voie de l'évaluation et le gouvernement a décidé de faire de l'évaluation des politiques publiques un outil de développement. Et donc, en 2012, le pays s'est doté d'une politique nationale de l'évaluation pour la période de 2012 à 2021. Et la collaboration avec le programme Twende Mbele a commencé effectivement en 2017. Et depuis cette depuis le début de cette collaboration, je pense que le programme Twende Mbele est le principal partenaire technique et financier en matière d'évaluation au Bénin. Et donc, ceci a permis de dynamiser vraiment le système, l'évaluation au Bénin sur plusieurs aspects. Donc, je vais parler d'abord de l'aspect renforcement de capacité, après le développement des outils, le développement des normes et des standards et en matière de collaboration de l'offre et de la demande des données probantes. Donc, en matière de renforcement de capacité, d'abord, le programme Twende Mbele a aidé à former les parlementaires sur le suivi et évaluation pour le contrôle de l'action gouvernementale. Ceci est aussi très important parce que le Bénin aujourd'hui est engagé dans l'élaboration d'une loi pour la planification de développement et l'évaluation. Donc, les parlementaires étant engagés dans ce domaine, ça va permettre à favoriser le vote de cette loi qui est actuellement déjà à l'Assemblée. Ensuite, il y a eu la formation des champions en évaluation, ceux qui peuvent vraiment aider à changer les choses. Nous allons parler ici des directeurs de cabinet, des secrétaires généraux des ministères et des DPP sur l'utilisation des données probantes pour la prise de décision. Donc, ensuite, il y a eu des programmes de formation pour les cadres en charge de l'évaluation au ministère. Ceci s'est passé à plusieurs ateliers ou bien à des conférences de l'AFREA, par exemple. Ensuite, nous avons les développements des outils. Donc, il y a beaucoup d'outils qui ont été développés au Bénin en matière d'évaluation avec la collaboration du programme Twende Mbele. Principalement, nous avons le MPAT, dont parlait le docteur Ayaboulela, qui est d'abord un outil qui est parti de l'Afrique du Sud, qui ensuite a été adapté aux autres pays membres du partenariat. Donc, il y a cet outil qui permet d'améliorer la performance des administrations. Et il y a un autre outil très important, puisque dans nos pays, souvent, pour faire des évaluations, soit on n'a pas beaucoup de temps pour prendre parce qu'on veut prendre des décisions ou on n'a pas beaucoup de budget. Donc, il y a, avec la collaboration toujours du programme Twende Mbele, on a développé la méthodologie d'évaluation rapide qui est utilisée beaucoup aujourd'hui. Il y a aussi le programme qui a contribué à l'élaboration et à la dissémination du guide d'évaluation sensible aux genre. Donc, nous savons tous que le genre est une question de développement aujourd'hui. Donc, ce guide aide beaucoup plus à prendre à la prise en compte de l'aspect genre dans les évaluations. Il y a aussi la stratégie de communication sur l'évaluation qui a été élaborée toujours. Et nous avons aujourd'hui, nous savons que l'évaluation n'est pas simplement un travail du gouvernement qui produit des données probantes. Il y a d'autres partenaires, parties prenantes aussi qui produisent des données, mais qui ne sont pas forcément bien utilisées par le gouvernement pour la prise de décision. Donc, un de ces acteurs, c'est les organisations de la société civile. Donc, il y a un manuel, ou bien on a essayé d'élaborer un manuel de procédure qui va permettre la collaboration entre les organisations de la société civile et le gouvernement en matière d'évaluation des politiques publiques, ce qui va faire que lorsque les organisations de la société civile vont produire des données probantes, le gouvernement pourra mieux les utiliser pour la prise de décision. Donc, nous avons en matière de développement des normes, il y a les recommandations qu'on a fait à partir du programme Twende Mbele, notamment par rapport à l'élaboration des rapports. Comment est-ce que les rapports doivent être présentés pour pouvoir favoriser leur utilisation? Donc, il y a la norme 1.5.25. Donc, même s'il y a un rapport d'évaluation, il faut essayer de résumer ça d'abord. Enfin, un bref résumé d'une page pour ceux qui ne peuvent pas beaucoup lire. Ensuite, on a les 5 pages, on peut faire ça en 5 pages ou en 25 pages avant d'avoir le rapport même de l'évaluation. Donc, selon le niveau où on l'est, selon la disponibilité à lire, on peut toujours avoir à se sentir à l'aise dans ces choses-là. Donc, un autre aspect, c'est sur la demande et l'offre des données probantes. Donc, il y a des formations qui ont été, des renforcements de capacités qui ont été financés par le programme Twende Mbele, notamment en matière d'évaluation, sur la méthodologie d'évaluation rapide. Et aussi, il y a le programme a financé une évaluation pour pouvoir permettre d'implémenter cette méthodologie. Et il y a l'étude diagnostique qui est sur la collaboration. Quel est l'état actuel de la collaboration entre les organisations de la société civile et le gouvernement en matière d'évaluation des politiques publiques. Donc, c'est à partir de cette étude diagnostique qu'on pourra élaborer un manuel de collaboration entre ces deux parties prenantes. Et une étude qui est très importante aussi, qui est actuellement en cours, c'est l'étude diagnostique sur l'utilisation des résultats d'évaluation dans la planification de développement et la budgétisation. Parce qu'une chose est que nous produisons des données probantes et l'autre qui est très important, c'est que ces données probantes soient vraiment utilisées pour la prise de décision. Donc, cela part par la planification, donc la prise en compte de ces données dans la planification et puis la budgétisation. Et ce travail aussi va être finalisé par l'élaboration d'un manuel qui sera désormais utilisé par le Bénin pour la planification et la budgétisation. Et ceci favorisera l'utilisation des données probantes pour la prise de décision. Donc, en gros, c'est ce que je pourrais dire sur la contribution du programme Twende Mbele sur le système national d'évaluation du Bénin. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup, Nadège. Et je crois que la formation des parlementaires a surtout eu les effets escomptés, car c'est en ce moment un député béninois, honorable Jérémy Adomahou, qui est actuellement le président du réseau des parlementaires africains pour l'évaluation des développements. Donc, ça a bien fonctionné. Et ce que vous dites sur l'étude sur l'utilisation de l'évaluation dans la planification et la budgétisation, il y a un commentaire dans le Q&A qui va dans le même sens, donc je vais à ce moment le lire. So there's a comment from Ben Paul Mungireza who says that M&E can only succeed with political will. I agree with Timothy that sensitizing high-level policymakers in the relevance of M&E is critical. However, we must also ensure clear institutional alignment between the government entity that spearheads M&E and the one that drives planning and the National Statistics Office. So indeed, this is a very relevant comment. And as we can see, Benin has taken this up with the study on the use of evaluation in planning and budgeting, which will result in a manual. And Twende Mbele itself is also pursuing work on indeed linking monitoring and evaluation to planning and budgeting. So let me come to Andrew. Ghana joined the Twende Mbele initiative a little later than the other countries and has also undergone some changes in the country on the location of the M&A unit. But perhaps, Andrew, you could share with us how you see what have been the major benefits from the Twende Mbele collaboration for Ghana for your national M&E system.
Thank you very much, Karen, and hello, colleagues. I've been here for the past 3 days, participating in another related activity. I've been part of an organization called Interval, International Group for Policy Research, Monitoring, and Evaluation. Anyway, so this discussion, this forum came at the right time because we in Ghana, we are sort of in a crossroads when it comes to the institutionalization of monitoring and evaluation. Yes, so I was invited in 2017 to assist the newly created Ministry of Monitoring and Evaluation, which was located in the office of the president with a minister, a substantive minister. I say substantive because the minister was a member of cabinet. There are 19 ministers who form the cabinet, and he was one of them. So that really gave a lot of strength and power to some extent to the new ministry. However, when we set out to work, what we discovered was that most of the ministries had policy planning and monetary evaluation units, but they existed only in name. There was hardly any capacity. So you had a heavily dependent supply, a heavily supply-driven M&E divisions. But then if you looked at the capacity, there was very little capacity. And so when in 2018, we had the opportunity to join, one of the things that we decided to focus on was to strengthening the capacity of the members of the policy planning and monetary evaluation units across the various ministries. There were about 33 ministries that we were working with. And the reason was that being at the center of the practice, in other words, being part of the executive architecture, we couldn't do our work very well without working very closely with our counterparts in the ministry. So we thought that we needed to get closer to the ministry. So we formed what we call a focal persons network, and which consisted of heads of all the PPMNE divisions across the ministry. So our first activity was to strengthen their capacity, and this is where we reached out to Twende Mbele to assist us. And I remember Ian came to Ghana on a couple of occasions to do capacity building and also to assist us in crafting a national M&E policy. Is the peer-to-peer learning mechanism, which we benefited a lot from, because that allowed us to see and to learn from what is happening or what was happening in other African countries, especially Uganda and South Africa. And also we benefited from the rapid assessment methodology that my two colleagues have already spoken about. Because the M&E ministry now is a secretariat. I'll talk to you a little bit later about it. Since you were part of the executive and we focus on what we call flagship programs, we needed to be able to develop the capacity to have just-in-time information for cabinet in terms of tracking the implementation of specific high priority policies and programs and feeding the information to cabinet. So the methodology, the rapid assessment methodology became very useful for our work. The other dimension, which I hinted earlier, was the development of a national M&E policy. Ian was part of it, and he came to Ghana a couple of times to assist us. And of course, that was possible because of the support we received from Twende Mbele. And then once the policy was developed, we needed to test it, we needed to validate it. And again, Twende Mbele came to assistance by supporting us with a small grant that enabled us to do the final validation of the policy. And subsequently, we made a presentation to the Vice President, who, by the way, is very keen on M&E and data and digitalization and all that. So he, after the presentation, he felt that the whole document, because initially we were seeking executive approval for the document, but then he decided that the document should go to cabinet. So we presented the document to cabinet. We sort of hit a legal constraint. So we tried to find a way around it because the M&E ministry, which was then, which became a secretariat, is not legally recognized in the Constitution. But the National Development Planning Commission is. So the Cabinet Subcommittee that studied the M&E policy, although they liked the policy, they felt that the institutional arrangement that led to the preparation of the policy may have sort of circumvented the existing legal arrangements. So now we try to find a way around it. And basically, we don't have to do anything to the document, but rather get the NDPC to present the document to the cabinet. And I think once we do that, the policy will be adopted. And I think one other area that we also benefited from the Twende Mbele was the holding of National Resource Fair. And it was the first time that was done in Ghana. And basically the Resource Fair was aimed at highlighting the key government achievements and by having or showcasing specific government projects and programs that we thought the people should be informed about. So our relationship, or our becoming a member of the Twende Mbele family, has been of immense help in trying to institutionalize the practice in Ghana. We have not had the benefit of reaching out to the parliamentarians and the executive or the key decision makers through the interventions of Twende Mbele, and maybe we may come back to this, in terms of looking into the future and what is it that we want Twende Mbele to support us. Because the biggest challenge in Ghana now is the utilization of M&E findings. The demand side is still very weak, and we need to double our efforts to generate interest in the M&E products. We are very weak on that, and perhaps this is where the conversation going forward with Twende Mbele, at least from the Ghana perspective, should be directed. So I'll pause here and wait for the next section. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Andrew. And indeed, since Timothy and Nadej have mentioned that they have made some progress in building demand for evaluations, use of evidence, then that indeed is perhaps another element going forward where Ghana can learn from some of the other member countries in the Twende Mbele initiative.
Absolutely.
Thank you. So actually, I wanted to pass to the next question, and after having spoken of the benefits from the Twende Mbele initiative, perhaps ask the colleagues what are some of the lessons that you draw from your experience with Twende Mbele? What lessons can national, regional, and global M&E players draw in trying to advance accountability, government performance, and improving development effectiveness as the Twende Mbele partner countries have done? So what are some of the lessons that you draw from the experience? Timothy?
Thank you, Corinne. So our journey has been blessed by many interesting lessons. Let me just share three quick lessons. The first one, it's important to understand the context of each country, the policy management context, the level of development, the amount of reforms. And this is not just a lesson that is coming from our experience in implementing or in being a Twende Mbele member as Uganda, but also as a member of the Twende Mbele Management Committee. I had the privilege of visiting other countries that we were supporting, and still this point is quite relevant. So in different countries, different approaches would work depending on the context. In some countries, there's a strong link between evidence, research, and parliament. In others, there's a very big gap and linkage. So in some countries, the management and coordination of monitoring and evaluation is done under the office of the president, under the presidency. In some countries, it is in the Ministry of Finance, and in some instances, it is with the National Planning Commission. And then who calls the power, who holds the authority to convene government. So that context all depends on the prevailing situation in the country. And the lesson here really is that it's important to do some analytical work from the word go to understand that context, because then it introduces you and guides you on what the entry point should be in terms of starting to develop or starting to strengthen the national M&E system. I have many examples that I can give, and also in our new countries, we had a delegation visiting us from Malawi, and we have had a number of delegations from a couple of other countries. And listening to their story, this point is even further strengthened. Sometimes it is an individual that is important as an entry point. Sometimes it is a ministry, sometimes it's an agency, sometimes it's a combination of two or three. The second point is that you should prioritize and select the most effective, but also the most feasible in terms of affordability strategy and entry point to adopt. So based on your analytical work in understanding the context, then you should be careful about what strategy you adopt and what is the most suitable entry point. The point here is that you can take an approach that is too expensive for a country, or that is difficult to sell, that is difficult to sell at the highest policy-making organ. In cabinet, in some countries, it's very difficult to go to cabinet with the policy instrument. In others, it's quite easy to slide through a policy requirements and you get approval from cabinet. In other places, it's more important to target parliament. So the issue of being very selective in terms of the strategy you select, but also the feasibility, which is most feasible and suitable strategy, depending on the circumstances. And of course, what champions you use. I think my sister from Benin, I'm hearing a French reflection. Okay. Highlighted the issue of champions. So this is also very, very important. And then finally, one important lesson is that it's very critical to embed all these developments in the national systems and national planning, budgeting, and policy framework of a country. The reason with this is that if you don't do this, then it is seen as foreign and it struggles with sustainability. The minute you are not driving anything through the Twende Mbele Secretariat, those initiatives fall off the ladder. So it's also very, very important to understand what are the national systems which we can build on, which you can, for us particularly, we think that we have had a strong rooting of the Twende Mbele initiative because we deeply embedded it in the annual and the 5-year work plan for the Department of Monitoring and Evaluation in Office of the Prime Minister. So everybody, the ministers know, the permanent secretary knows about the Twende, the activities and how they are supported and strengthened, and by Twende Mbele and our partnerships with 3IE, our partnerships with the Clear AA. So all these partners, we have them properly mapped out, and they are contributing to the work that we already planning with the current systems. I thought these are 3 strong lessons that I should share, and look forward to the experience of my other colleagues. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Timothy. And I see you're already responding to some of the comments and questions that have been posted in the Q&A box. Thank you for that. Let me pass to Nadej. Oops, Nadej, you're muted.
Oui, je disais que pour le Bénin, les leçons apprises avec le programme Twende Mbele, je vais les résumer en quelques points. D'abord, c'est la première chose, c'est la démocratisation de l'évaluation aujourd'hui, qui est beaucoup plus acceptée par les acteurs comme un outil de développement, d'amélioration de ce que nous faisons, que comme un outil de coercition où on peut prendre l'évaluation pour punir quelqu'un. Donc, c'est beaucoup plus accepté aujourd'hui. Et aussi, l'autre chose, c'est que on n'a plus besoin de faire des rapports d'évaluation qui sont trop lourds. On a besoin plutôt que les évaluations que nous faisons puissent donner lieu à des recommandations de politiques publiques qui sont facilement implémentables. Donc, aujourd'hui aussi, nous avons une meilleure connaissance et appropriation de l'évaluation par tous les acteurs, que ce soit dans les ministères. Tout le monde sait à peu près ce que quand on parle d'évaluation, comment ça se fait, les différentes étapes, tout ça là. Parce qu'avec l'aide du programme, il y a eu beaucoup d'activités qui ont été réalisées. Et donc, aussi bien, ce n'est pas seulement au niveau central, mais au niveau déconcentré, que ce soit au niveau des préfectures que dans les mairies. Donc, ce n'est pas seulement ici, tout le monde s'est vraiment démocratisé et tous les acteurs peuvent vraiment utiliser aujourd'hui, prendre l'évaluation comme un outil vraiment de développement. Donc, voilà en gros ce que je pourrais dire sur les leçons apprises.
Merci beaucoup, Nadej. C'est très pratique. Andrew, do you also have some lessons you've drawn from the experience?
Yes, Karen, I do. And as you all know, evaluation is really a work in progress, at least in our context. And we had a root shock early this year when Parliament decided to take away the budget for our small secretariat without any reason. They decided to take it away, and it's had a big impact. Even though the money in the scheme of things is not that big, about $250,000, but in the specific context of Ghana, it's huge, and it has created a lot of problems. And that brings me back to the role of parliamentarians, MPs, and even the executive. They create these functions, structures, and they don't realize that these functions need to have resources in terms of, budget and, human capital and so on. And so, and since most of these decision makers, be it parliamentarians or the members of cabinet, do not really understand the function. They could see it as a threat. So if there are any budget constraints, they will not hesitate to remove the budget that they've approved, and the secretary has been a victim of that. So sensitizing the parliamentarians and key decision makers is very, very important. And here Ghana has lessons to learn from our counterparts in Uganda and Benin, especially. The other lesson is that the function is not well understood, and I think it flows from the first point. And so we constantly need support from the outside, be it, it is sort of peer-to-peer, the opportunity to have peer-to-peer learning, and occasionally financial support. If the Secretariat wasn't participating in a project, well-bound project that has allocated some money for M&E activities, it would have been in severe difficulties because it lost its budget. But because we have this external support, it's made the transition relatively smooth sailing. So that external support is very important. You take that away, and I think the function will be in severe jeopardy. And the other dimension is the need for a champion. Leadership is everything. And if there's no leadership, there's no champion to support the function. When there are, challenges in the form of people who may not necessarily it heightens the vulnerability of the function. So having that relationship with the outside can also be very useful. So these are the three lessons that I will that I've highlighted, and I think going forward, we should be paying more attention to them. Thank you, Karen.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Let's pass on to some of the comments and questions that have been put in the Q&A box. So indeed, there were some questions on structuring how the different countries or your different functions are structured. I think that's been answered. Timothy, of course, is in the Office of the Prime Minister. Andrew is in the Secretariat in the Office of the Presidency, but indeed much smaller than Timothy's office. In Benin, they used to be in the presidency. Now they're in the Ministry of Planning and Government Action. Modiegi Nagani says that in Botswana, they've recently brought the functions of planning and M&E together under the National Planning Commission. And they also have an approval of establishment of M&E units across all ministries, which I think Andrew was mentioning as well. But capacity in M&E remains an issue. Indeed, that's something that we hear from across the continent. Also, budget cuts on M&E when financing is tight. M&E budgets do tend to get cut. It's something we see across the continent. But how can countries, or perhaps I maybe should put it more directly, what are the three of you doing to try to ensure buy-in by all the institutions across the government? What can promote this buy-in? I've heard you mention things like a champion, doing analysis, good situational analysis before embarking on the process. Is there anything else you can do to improve buy-in of M&E, the use of M&E data and evidence? Maybe let me start with Madej.
OK, merci beaucoup. Donc, pour faciliter l'acceptation de ces données par tous les acteurs, ce que nous faisons au Bénin, c'est qu'au début de chaque processus, il y a un comité de pilotage qui est mis en place. Et ce comité de pilotage est composé de toutes les parties prenantes. Si je prends par exemple une évaluation dans le secteur pour l'évaluation de la politique nationale de protection de l'enfance qui est en cours actuellement. Déjà, pour la qualité de l'évaluation elle-même, il y a la Direction générale de l'évaluation et de l'Observatoire du changement social qui est le premier acteur qui doit être membre de ce comité de pilotage pour pouvoir assurer la qualité en matière d'évaluation. Il y a aussi la Direction générale de la planification, qui est aussi membre parce que c'est cette direction qui s'occupe de tout ce qui est politique, l'élaboration des politiques. Donc, c'est en quelque sorte, ces acteurs sont là pour voir la qualité, le côté méthodologique. Maintenant, il y aura dans ce comité des acteurs de la protection de l'enfance, ceux qui sont en tout cas, toutes les directions, que ce soit les organisations de la société civile qui s'occupent de l'enfance, il y a l'UNICEF, il y a tous ces acteurs qui sont membres. Ce qui fait que, et donc déjà au début, lorsque les thèmes de référence de l'évaluation sont élaborés, on doit soumettre ça à la direction, à notre direction, qui doit valider pour voir si les thèmes de référence sont élaborés de telle sorte qu'à la fin, on puisse avoir de bons résultats. Donc, c'est la première étape. Donc, une fois que c'est fait, c'est le processus maintenant est suivi par le comité de pilotage. Donc, une fois que le rapport de démarrage qui décrit correctement la théorie du changement, la matrice d'évaluation, tout ça là, ça doit être validé obligatoirement par le comité de pilotage qui dit oui, c'est bon, avant que si c'est un consultant qui fait l'évaluation, le consultant n'aille faire la collecte de données. Et lorsqu'il fait sa collecte et qu'on a le premier rapport, ce rapport est soumis encore au comité qui l'étudie et valide d'abord, fait ses recommandations avant qu'on ne prenne en compte tout ça là pour venir à la validation. Donc, quand on fait toutes ces étapes, c'est difficile qu'à la fin, une partie prenante dise non, nous ne prenons pas en compte ces recommandations. Donc, c'est un peu ce que nous faisons et je pense que c'est ce que je pourrais dire, en gros.
Yes, that's very similar to what we do in IDEF as well. We have an evaluation reference group involving all of the important parties who validate every step of the process. And we have also found that really improves the buy-in of the findings and the recommendations at the end of the evaluation. Indeed. Timothy, you have any other suggestions on how to improve buy-in?
Yes, let me just share one additional one because you have already highlighted a few. And so one of the things we are doing now is to implement can I say, a more robust communication strategy on the results and products of M&E. So we have realized that it makes a lot of sense if you go to a senior top management of a ministry and you present the findings, the methodologies, the objective of an evaluation. You will be shocked and amazed the extent to which the participants there will internalize, appreciate, and even react, you know, the level of reacting to this. So the assumption we have been making is that you do an evaluation of an intervention, let's say a project in the ministry, let's say Ministry of Agriculture. You send the report, you invite a few participants to a workshop, disseminate and then publish the report to the website. And you think that first the report is read, and number two is that they take advantage of it and use the information in that report. But the truth is people they don't read these reports. They, even those who read may not really understand. Somebody may be bored by the methodology somewhere and, you know, put it aside. So this intensive communication of an evaluation to the senior management of a particular ministry for us has made far-reaching implications in terms of buying. Now we are suffering from the opposite of the problem that Asibe, Dr. Andrew was talking about. For us, the demand is now higher than the supply.
It's just Andrew.
Yes, because of this kind of initiatives. Now, most sectors are saying, we need this program evaluated, we need this intervention evaluated. Unfortunately, we don't have the resources to do as many evaluations as would be desired. So that's now a second level of a problem to deal with. So I think that's really communication, and the way we communicate, the way we package it is a good policy. Thank you.
So you've become the victims of your own success. Indeed. Okay. All right, let's take another question from the Q&A. Jacob Novignon writes, this is a great initiative desperately needed in resource-poor settings like Africa. In many African countries, governments are formed with preconceived interventions popularized during campaigns. In Ghana, the country has implemented a free secondary education program that has generated significant public interest. Are there concrete examples across the Twende Mbele countries on how evidence has shaped intervention choices or revision of already implemented interventions? Do any of the panelists have a concrete example of how evidence from M&E has shaped an intervention or revised an already existing intervention? Let me just put an open question. Does anyone have an example?
Okay.
Oui, Nadège?
Oui, je peux dire quelque chose en ce sens, même si c'est une question vraiment très, très, très pertinente et intéressante. Et je pense que nous sommes en train de vouloir faire quelque chose en ce sens pour vraiment suivre la prise en compte des recommandations, des évaluations. Donc, déjà, je ne vais pas dire que ça se fait, mais pour connaître vraiment l'ampleur de l'utilité de tout ce que nous faisons, nous sommes en train de mettre en place une plateforme avec le partenaire Clear Afrique francophone pour pouvoir suivre tout ce qui est recommandation des évaluations. Donc, sur la plateforme, on va mettre tout ce qui est recommandation des évaluations et chaque ministère, à chaque étape, doit nous dire, voilà, voici telle action que nous avons prise pour suivre cette recommandation qui a été faite. Pour nous, déjà, à la direction générale de l'évaluation, d'abord, ça, là, c'est une recommandation d'une méta-évaluation qui a été faite récemment sur les évaluations depuis 2012 jusqu'à 2019. Donc, c'est que les recommandations ne sont pas vraiment utilisées. Donc, c'est déjà une utilisation des recommandations d'évaluation que nous implémentons déjà. Donc, pour pouvoir prendre en compte cette recommandation de la méta-évaluation, nous sommes en train de mettre en place cette plateforme qui, là où tous les ministères seront présents, et quand il y a une évaluation, nous allons enregistrer toutes les recommandations sur la plateforme et nous pourrons faire facilement le suivi, faire des relances. Peut-être est-ce que lorsque vous voulez élaborer une nouvelle, une nouvelle politique ou bien une nouvelle action, est-ce que vous avez pensé à ça? Donc, c'est ce que nous faisons effectivement pour pouvoir vraiment utiliser les résultats des évaluations de façon pratique. Monsieur.
Okay, thank you very much, Nadesh.
Yes. Just
Yes,
a
Andrew?
quick example. I think the question is very, very pertinent, and it's also very tricky. Our experience in Ghana has shown that it's easier to present findings to the implementing entities. And mostly, if you do formative evaluations, usually rapid assessment, and you have a validation workshop with them and you come out with your findings, the implementing entities are more receptive to what your findings reveal. Where the difficulty lies, it's trying to reach the decision makers at the political level. So I would say that yes, if you work in collaboration with the implementing entity, it's easier to share your findings and to hope that they will be used. And we have had examples of that. In Ghana, we did these fish landing sites, and it worked very well. The person who asked the question, the free SHS, it's a very sensitive topic. Nonetheless, there are efforts to do a rapid assessment of that. And if we are not able to present the findings at the highest level, at least the implementers will have the benefit of, we will have the benefit of sharing the findings with them. And incidentally, they are part of the exercise. And it's also important that the implementers are roped in when you are designing such evaluations, because at the end of the day, they are the ultimate users of the findings that will come out. So I hope that.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Let me read out another comment from the Q&A. So this is just a comment, not a question, from Samson Machuka, I believe a colleague from Kenya. I find this forum very informative and useful in terms of assessing gains made by Twende Mbele in strengthening M&E capacities in the 6 countries of Africa since its inception. I believe that its scope should extend to focus more policymakers and members of parliament as a key strategy to enhance political goodwill in mainstreaming M&E programs in their development agenda. Secondly, evaluation should take precedence at outcome and impact levels as a way of using credible evidence to inform development policies in the respective countries. And then we also have a comment from Bouré Magado from Niger. Mr. Andrew raised some very important questions about M&E culture promotion by decision makers, particularly leadership. And he continues, as a former MP of Niger and former Afriya Secretary General, I can tell you that there is a lot to do in all African countries. It is true that Uganda, Benin are doing their best, but they still have a need of capacity building, either towards executives or the parliament, because the main problem is that these people move a lot and there is a need to accompany them on the long term. AFDB is supporting AppNode, and we congratulate them for this, but there is need for other partners to be sensitive also, or to be sensitized to also join efforts. And there is indeed another colleague, another comment from Senakpon Fidel Dedehuanu, who also talks about the movement of people. Has capacity building taken into account the probable movement of persons into and within and out of institutions? We may reinforce the capacity of someone, say a director or a deputy, but what if afterwards he quits his position or quits the institution? This raises the question of the sustainability of the outcome of the capacity building. Would any of the panelists like to say something about how the capacity building, how the results of capacity strengthening that you have mentioned in your various interventions, how that can be sustained? How do we ensure that we're really building institutional capacity? Any of the panelists?
Well, thank you, Karen. I think you can't avoid a little bit of brain drain or movement. There is definitely in the public sector. I mean, people reach retirement age and then they retire. Most of the people who are in the senior positions are also not very far away from retirement, but also people move on to other jobs and so on. So I think one of the strategies is to have as many people participating as possible, so that the departure of one or two people does not affect what you have already built. So you should have a minimum mass of actors that know the process, that are participating, and that way then you can ensure sustainability. And the other issue is, in our case, is not limit the capacity building to the central coordinating office. Let it be spread to the other arms of government, because otherwise you have the only people who are able to commission, manage, and do these evaluations and work on this evidence limited to one institution. What about if one day government restructures? They can restructure the whole ministry and remove the institution and scatter all the actors. So yeah, I think the policy really is, let's try to involve a core minimum mass of persons as possible, and in that way we should be able to ensure longer-term sustainability.
And if I may add, Karen, the M&E function is evolving all the time. So, I mean, now we're talking of machine learning and so on. And so then there is a need for a training strategy where, you know, you sort of, even those who are have been trained and performing in the function, there should be an opportunity for such people to update their skills, to learn new skills, you know, because otherwise they can become irrelevant very quickly. So in addition to, you know, bringing in new young people, those who are still there and have a few years to go, they should be encouraged to strengthen their skills, because the function is evolving all the time. Thank you.
Yes. Nadesh, you wanted to come in, please?
Oui, donc je pense que c'est le changement de poste du personnel en charge de l'évaluation est un réel problème. Ça s'est même présenté vraiment de façon importante au sein même de la structure en charge de l'évaluation, où les cadres ont tous eu d'autres postes et ils sont partis. Donc, il faut essayer à chaque fois de refaire les activités de renforcement de capacité. Donc, ce que nous faisons ici, c'est que chaque année, au moins, nous faisons une activité de renforcement de capacité pour tous les cadres dans les sectoriels, dans les ministères en charge de l'évaluation. Et aussi, nous faisons aussi la même chose dans les mairies, Nous essayons de parcourir les 12 départements du Bénin, même si nous n'atteignons pas tout le monde à la fois. Sur 2 ans, on peut atteindre toutes les mairies, toutes les préfectures. Et aussi, si nous prenons le cas de ceux qui sont vraiment en charge de la fonction évaluative, avec l'aide du programme Twende Mbele, toujours, nous organisons actuellement une activité de renforcement de capacité qui aura lieu en août et où on va former les acteurs de la direction avec élargi à certains ministères sur l'évaluation des politiques publiques. Donc, on essaie de reprendre. C'est un peu difficile parce que ça ne me permet pas une vraie capitalisation des acquis. Mais bon, pour le moment, c'est ce que nous essayons de faire pour remédier un peu à ce problème. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Nadesh. Colleagues, I see we have come to the end of our time. And I see that there are still comments coming in the Q&A box. I'm very sorry that we will not be able to take all of the questions that have come in, just to recognize some of the other comments and questions raised by Sla Rahmouni, Gladys Maba, and Sla again. I'm sorry that we will not be able to get to your questions, but thank you very much for your interest and for the comments that you've made. I would like to thank very much our 3 panelists, Timothy, Andrew, and Nadej, and of course our Twende Mbele program manager, Aya Bulela. Timothy is saying he doesn't see the comments. All right, I'll just very quickly read them out then, Timothy, but I don't think we'll have time to go into answering them. So Sla Rahmouni writes, the objective of standalone evaluation is to assess the extent to which activities have led to the achievement of outputs and how these in turn have contributed to the achievement of expected results and impacts. Drawn lessons and recommendations for future decisions in order to better act for the development of the territory and the improvement of the living conditions of the population. That said, we cannot evaluate projects and programs whose objectives have not been achieved or which are microscopic and have a very low impact on change. Then Gladys Maba writes, great initiatives. Indeed, policymakers' involvement in the process is key for the implementation of recommendations, but in the case programs are funded by means other than public budget, how do you ensure that evaluation tools meet funding organizations? Some of them are now disappearing. Modiege came back to say, Uganda mentioned that the area is still not yet understood. That is what we are facing on this side, i.e. Botswana, to the extent that the little capacity we have built eventually also gets transferred. Indeed, we have to do change management from above. Champions are key to advocate for M&E, otherwise we will continue to have challenges. And then the last comment from Sla Rahmouni is merci pour l'invitation, c'est très pertinent d'avoir vous joindre et surtout le retour des expériences des pays en matière d'évaluation et de suivi des projets et des programmes. La Tunisie a une bonne expérience qu'on peut partager avec les pays africains. So those are the comments placed in the Q&A box. So thank you again to all participants for sharing your views, for sharing your comments, your experiences, and for your questions. Let me again thank our panelists, Timothy, Andrew, and Nadej, and our program manager, Aya Bulela, for setting out more information about the Twende Mbele program. Let me thank all of the participants for participating, the interpreters for interpreting all throughout this session. You can find more information about Twende Mbele on the Twende Mbele website, which is twendembele.org, I believe. Is that correct, Aya?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that is correct, Karen.
Okay, so twendembele.org, you can find all information about the initiative. So thank you to all. Please, please do join us again for another gLocal event. We have another one on Friday, which is on the lessons for future crisis response from IDEV's evaluation of the AFDB's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. That's on Friday, the 2nd of June at 10 o'clock GMT. And on the gLocal website, you can find all the other gLocal events that are taking place all throughout this week. So please do avail yourselves of those opportunities. Thank you, everyone, and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.